Hello everyone, this is Fieldmaster Victor Newstroev. Today we are going to talk about blockade of the pawn chain. However, of course, we cannot go through and not discuss current FIDE Open World Rapid Championship, which is currently, which was finished yesterday. Now they are going to participate. All players are going to play in the Blitz tournament. The Rapid one was over, and we have a new Rapid World Champion. I'm sure you can see the screen. Yes, yeah, I'm sharing, right? So rankings after round 3. So 3 Russian players. The first one is Volodar Murzin, scoring 10 of 13, and then Grishchuk and Nepomniachtchi, 2 strong Russian grandmasters. Well, what can I say? Well, I defeated the Rapid World Champion because I have a game against Volodar Murzin. We played once. That time he wasn't a grandmaster, he was international master with a rating over 2400, and I defeated him without almost any mistakes. Well, with a few inaccuracies, but it was a very good game, maybe one of my best games. Okay, so good to know. Well, I wish he becomes a world champion with a standard time control too. Then I can say that I defeated the world champion. Okay, fine. But well, let's see. Well, there was a scandal actually with Magnus Carlsen. What did happen? So Magnus Carlsen rejected to change his jeans for other pants. Which he could do because he considered such a dress code to be dubious. Well, what can I say? If a chess player agrees to follow a certain rules on the tournament, he should follow it. And then the sanctions like a fine or a disqualification. Well, he wasn't disqualified. He withdrew himself. But I think that if he agrees, then he should follow the rules. Of course, the rules are stupid, right? So, for example, his jeans and his casual look was completely fine with with all these translations, with all these streams to the. So it doesn't change much. So that's why I think this rule about dress code should be lifted next time, and well, jeans and sneakers should be allowed. Well, what's your opinion, by the way? What do you think? Who is correct? Magnus or FIDE? And what do you think about the dress code? Okay, so yeah, why does Magnus always get board 1 even if he doesn't win the first round? Well, the player with the highest rating gets the board 1. For such tournaments like Blitz and Rapid Championship, well, it's just a rule of the tournament. It doesn't, well, not in all tournaments there is such a rule, but in some there is. And why such a rule should exist? Because the world is following Magnus Carlsen, so they would love to see a video of Magnus playing, even if he loses. Because he is the best and he showed that he was the best during all these years. So that's why, well, sometimes it's not only the board 1, but the board 2, 3, also under certain players. But usually it's the board 1. Well, I played in the tournament in Corsica. There was a certain rule about the first 3 boards, I think. Well, it's mainly because it's easy to stream and film people who are playing on the scene where the top players usually play. Okay, fine. Anyway, well, dress code is a specific thing. I absolutely understand, and but the goal of feeder is to improve the quality of the picture, so make chess attractive for streaming, for showing it on TV, because other sports like soccer, for example, well, basketball, gain a lot of money because of streams. Chess is streamed only, well, through such services like YouTube or Twitch, but to a very small audience. And in order to let all people watch chess, like, for example, they watch American football or soccer, uh, or hockey or basketball, it does make sense to make this picture look like beautiful, so attractive. And that's why they want to get rid of, that's why they want this dress code. But nowadays, the fashion changes, and wearing jeans is okay. So it looks still stylish. Yeah, so so John thinks that new chess is a different sport. Yeah, yeah, okay. It would be interesting to participate in the tournament where chess players are allowed to play only when they are nude. Well, interesting. I don't think that I would participate, but well, it sounds funny, and I'm sure that it would attract people. They would love to watch naked people playing. Okay, fine. So today we are talking about the by the way, I have one more question. So when does the Blitz tournament start? So today is the 29th. Yeah, I think it's today and the 30th. Am I right? Ah, mañana. So tomorrow. Okay, it's tomorrow. Well, actually, we can take a look at the scheduling here. So Blitz. Playing schedule. It starts tomorrow. Okay. It's actually only one day. Wait a sec. Uh, but I thought that Blitz is played 2 days and Rapid three. Or maybe well, okay, fine. Maybe I'm mistaken. But before that, there were more rounds, not 13. I think they played 14 rounds. Yeah, okay, it's great that there are so many people here. That's why let's not waste our time and focus on our topic today. Tonio, I muted you, but if you want to say anything, you are welcome. Okay, so let's do the webinars. So let me share a part of the screen. Well, what else? Yeah, well, we first do the main topic. We will cover the homework from our previous event. Then we will talk about pawn chains or just how to blockade the pawn structures with our pieces. And then we will, if we have time, we will focus on the games of Volodar Murzin, the winner of World Rapid Championship this year. Okay, so first of all, today, of course, the topic is blockade of the pawn chain. However, you should understand that you have to learn how to blockade the enemy pawn structure because they can do a pawn chain in many cases. So almost any pawn structure can be transformed to a pawn chain. Well, very often there is such a transformation. That's why let's start. So first of all, this is a very important. Okay, let's cover the homework first. And for the homework, we have this game between Lyubomir Lyuboyevich and Anatoly Karpov, and it was about advantage stability. So let's quickly check it. This week I think I didn't get any answers. However, the question was how to continue in this position. So now I'm waiting for your suggestions because there were no answers. How white, how black should increase their advantage and how they should play for a win. They definitely have advantage, and mainly because this knight is definitely better than this bishop. But there is no way to invade the enemy camp. Well, this queen is about to go to a8 actually. And it looks like knight d4. Well, maybe knight d4 makes sense. Knight d4, bishop d4. Then what? If queen takes, then queen takes queen, and we lose that pawn on d4, which means our position is losing. And if we decide to take with a pawn, they bring the king, or yeah, they bring the king, and then they invade our territory with queen e8. Well, queen e1, queen d1, queen c6. Queen c6, well, queen c6 does make sense. Then we can exchange the queens. But what I think is that queen d8 is the very best move here because it stops these, and at the same time, this allows black to open the position on the other side of the board. So king c1, just a waiting move. g5, with the idea of doing h4 and creating a pass pawn there, which will distract enemy pieces. Take, check. Now knight goes there. How does it work? If, for example, well, I'm sure you cannot go to the enemy camp because knight c6 stops it. I think that it does make sense to include this check. Why? To threaten, yeah, to win the bishop just. So he cannot invade a8. After knight e7, he had to play this move. This move, king d7. Queen goes back to e4 and queen f5. So there is still no invasion, but there is a possibility of playing queen to f5. And this queen f5 leads to a queen exchange. So king d3 is a loss of a bishop. Taking here means improving the knight. That's why here white chooses queen d3. If queen d3, then at least the king is closer to the place of action, but black doesn't take, and black plays this move. So queen d6 is, of course, not playable. It's a pin. Queen f5. Now the queens are exchanged. E takes f5. Why e? So that was another very important move. What do you think? Why we should capture with the e pawn? Well, we capture with the knight not because we want to control the light squares with a knight. And what's the purpose of the control of these squares? The white pieces are unable to invade our camp using the light squares. So knight g6, and then reroll the king to want the pawn on e5. So this is one of the ideas. The other idea is that now we have two pawns to fight against the g pawn. So we can have a passed pawn once we exchange the f or the h pawn for the g pawn. Bishop e3, knight g6. So the pawn is hanging, e6. King comes closer, bishop g5. King takes. So the pawn is lost. Okay, yeah, the pawns are on light squares and the enemy bishop cannot do anything. But on e6 was also a light square. However, this is another critical moment of the game. What do you think? Well, it should be a winning position because we have extra pawn. By the way, here king e6. What's wrong with bishop d8? Because it seems logical too. So they are about to capture on b6. It allows us to play king e5, but king e5 it seems to be risky. It allows us to play f4. Yes, it does allow us to play f4. And what after f4? So if they take, we continue with h4, and the king is out of the square of the pawn, right? So there is only a bishop that can stop it. And how the bishop can stop it? By a sacrifice. By sacrifice, because doing this is very slow. The pawn is already promoted. Okay, so that's why bishop d8 doesn't work. King d2. Now, how to continue? Yeah, we have to create a breakthrough. But you guys suggest, well, king up. King up seems to be quite slow because actually we would love to occupy this square. If you want to play this move, then they play this. And then it will be much harder for you to play f4 if f4 is the plan. Okay, this take, because what else they can do? Well, if they play something like that, it's completely losing, right? Because the pawn in game without a pawn is definitely easily winning for black. Uh, so f4, how do they play? Again, if they take with the bishop, then, well, this is a winning position because the outside pass pawn here decides the game, like in many other pawn in games. King, well, how do you play? h4, king f3, h3, king g3, h2, he takes, you take there, and then you are closer to the enemy pawns. So king c3, and how to play? Well, b5 at least. Or, oh, king a3, king c2, king b4. And then you advance this pawn. That's why they should capture with the g pawn. And here you suggest king f5, but king f5 means king e3. And well, king f5 is definitely a plan, but instead it does make sense to advance the pawn further to force the king to go closer to it. King f3, now king f5. So king g3 was played. How to continue this time? Okay, Shahrat suggests knight takes f4. Please explain the concept. What if bishop takes? Yeah, exactly. So take, and the bishop takes h2, which forces the king to take and move further from the bishop and leaving the bishop hanging, after which we capture it, and then it's the same. Our king is closer to the enemy pawns and we win. Absolutely correct. Bishop d8 was played in the game. Well, it's hard to suggest anything, but it's completely losing. How is it completely losing? Well, at least all these pawns die. Well, we cannot promote this one further, but we can attack this. And after we take there, these are protected. What we need is just to come closer with the king and simply take it. Okay, let me show you what happened. So he takes there and promotes. The key the position was won because of this key advantage, the passed pawn on the h file, and because this passed pawn was the outside passed pawn. So this queen exchange was a very nice idea, and capturing with the e pawn also was a very strong move, because after doing a 4, the h pawn becomes the outside passed pawn and distracts enemy forces, after which we can switch back to the king side and get to the king side faster and capture the enemy pawns for free. Okay, fine. That was what we were talking about at our previous webinar. Today, the webinar is about pawn chains and pawn structures, how to block successfully them with our pieces. And let's start. Well, when do you usually meet pawn chains? Well, the main example is, of course, French defense. And for example, in the advanced variation, when they play e5. We are going to do a quick repetition of what you should do with pawn chains. Probably you already know it. So knight c6, knight f3, let's say. Well, here, for example, I play bishop d7. I know that people play queen b6, but bishop d7 is a more solid move. And what you should do when your opponent has a pawn chain and you blockaded this pawn chain with your pawns, your task is to identify weaknesses in this pawn chain and undermine them. Usually it is a base, so you should undermine the base. What is the base here? So for example, if you somehow, well, just an example, if you somehow play c4, well, actually it does happen in a3 variation, then here, in order to, well, you have a lot of ideas, of course, in this position, but some of them can be doing this, undermining the pawn on c3, because after b takes and b takes, the pawn on c3 is considered to be a base of that pawn chain, and the base should be attacked. And once the base is attacked, well, once we capture it, we can capture other pawns too. What else can be done? Well, here, for example, let's say they play bishop d3. Let's say we play rook c8. And then we can capture and play queen b6, for example. Well, let me play a stupid move like knight d2. Then queen b3 right away, pushing pressure on this pawn. So they have no defenders. Well, this is a blunder. What they have to do is just to take, which means that their pawn structure is ruined and the pawn on a5 becomes weaker. So the pawn chain is strong when it's not the form of the pawn chain is not changed. Once we get rid of one of the pawns, all pawns may become weak. Here, actually, I have a very nice variation that I can suggest. Rook c8, and if castle, then you at the very least can play knight b4. Because of the bishop moves, you have knight c2. That means that they have to play knight c3 and let you exchange the knight for the bishop, which is definitely in the black's favor. But if they play bishop e2 instead, queen b6, and which move? No, 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 not in this position. Okay, maybe it's in this position, queen b6, bishop c2 here. No, then you have c takes d4, c takes d4, and knight b4 even. No, it's actually bishop e2, I think. Queen b6. And d3 or something like that. Then c takes d4, c takes d4. And I don't remember, but in a certain position you can play g5 just. Why? Because if the bishop takes, it's this hanging. If the knight takes, then you take this pawn on d4. And once you take the pawn on d4, the pawn on e5 becomes a weakness automatically. So you can win both pawns by sacrificing one of them. Okay, actually, I don't fully remember the line that I wanted to show you here. I just don't remember which move white plays. Okay, maybe this. The queen should be on b6. It's definitely not castle. Knight a3, no. A3 maybe. C takes maybe this line. Queen b6 in this position. Yes, it's this line. Now what? In order to protect, they have to move the bishop because bishop a3 leaves the b2 pawn hanging. So bishop c2, after which g5 works really well. So this is the line I wanted you to show you. Well, if h3, which is mainly played, because what else? g4 is coming, and then the knight is chased away. You can capture on d4 successfully. That's why, well, this is a blunder because d4 is hanging, h3. But even after h3, you have a strong attack. You can even capture there and then play bishop c5. Again, bishop a3 is not a good move because you can capture on b2. They may lose a rook or the knight, for example. And if they castle, you take material back. This is a weakness. This is a weakness. f2 is potentially a weakness too. That's why many people retreat on e2. And then you can capture their king moves. And what do you think? How to continue in this position? Yeah, f6, not rook c4. Rook c4, I think, is too slow and doesn't make much sense because you still cannot go there. So it's f6, opening the position there. Knight goes there, and instead of the white pawn chain, now black has strong pawns in the center. He is about to play this move, castle, and continue with the attack on the king side. Okay, fine. Well, what? So you see, it's either c takes d5, c takes d4, c takes d4, and this pawn becomes the attack. In case of these variations, like a3, c4, this pawn very often becomes the object of the attack because it becomes a base. However, another scenario in some of variations of French defense, it happens too. For example, here, let's say bishop d3, c5, c3, knight goes there, knight goes there. So take e f6, take knight takes, castle. So in such variations, we play f6 in order to undermine this pawn. So the pawn chain presents a very strong pawn structure, and you definitely should do something with it, especially if you already blocked such a pawn chain with your pawns. And you either attack the base or undermine one of the pawns of the pawn chain. Here, f6 provides black with with a playable position. So bishop d6, castle, and so on. Again, those of you who play French defense, you probably are aware of these lines. So this, take with a bishop first, knight e4. If queen c1, it's knight g5. If knight e2, it's even rook f3 with a strong attack here. It doesn't mean black is winning, but the attack is quite promising. Okay, so remember that if the enemy pawns are blocked with your pawns, try to either attack the base or undermine them. Now let's focus on other scenarios where you blockade the enemy pawn structures or enemy pawn chains with your pieces. So here white is about to advance his pawns, like h4, h5, maybe f4, f5, trying to open the position here. Maybe instead, well, d4 is hanging if he plays e4 at the moment, but maybe he prepares this move and plays it later. So the pawns look really dangerous in the center. That's why it does make sense for black to take some immediate actions. What would you suggest here for black? So, okay, Shahrat suggests that c4 and b4. Well, c4 does make sense, but I don't think that this is the move that you should start with. Because while the pawn is here, at least you stop e4. Once you push, you allow him to push e4. Well, c4, he moves, and then he does that. And even if you decide to play b4, he can simply ignore it. Because b takes, bishop takes, he is fine. He's improving his bishop. So here, if you can somehow blockade the enemy pawns on the positions where they are, this bishop on d2 becomes terrible. And you can later take advantage of it. h5 is one of the suggestions. Well, I don't think it's a good move. If you play so, they can capture en passant. So then you have to capture with a rook. How do they play? Maybe f5, actually. You cannot take. You have to move, and well, maybe you play rook h4. I actually don't think rook h4 is a good move. Rook h4, then they take here. And if you take, they take with a queen. And if you take here with a queen, then this, and you lose a knight. So no, h5 allows white to play f5. So if f5 is the main threat, then what should you do? Error suggests queen d5. Okay, queen d5. Well, how does it stop f5? I also think that you miss e4 in such a case, because now you cannot take on d4, your queen is hanging. And once the queen moves, probably he does this. So you have, well, f5 doesn't work because of en passant, and then bishop g6, you lose a pawn. You have to play knight e7, right, to stop it. Well, they probably should continue with rook h3, trying to initiate the attack. Then knight f5, e4, knight goes back, and then they can still play f5, but it's playable for black, so it's not so bad. Maybe you can do this move. They take and you capture there, making a fork. So I think it would work, like bishop f4. If they take here, you take with your queen, and you have enough defenders of these bishop on e4. If instead, if instead they capture with this, you take there, and this is a fork. So it was still possible. But white plays h4, so threatening with h5 maybe. How do we continue? So don't forget to blockade using the light squares. Knight f5. Well, many of you here may say, well, if we play so and they take, we double our pawns. We move the pawn away from the center. Doesn't matter. This time your task is to not allow the enemy pawns to move. And if for such purposes you have to slightly ruin your pawn structure, it's completely fine. Now you have a very good bishop comparing to this bishop. His pawn movements are not possible at all. Of course, he doesn't take this knight. Yeah, well, in this position, yes, bishop f4 holds everything. They just move the rook. Knight d6. So we try to prevent the pawn movements, like e4 especially, and c4 too, but c4 is not playable. And we manually blockading them with our pieces. h5. So looks like there will be some counterattack with g6 or something like that. And if so, if you're expecting such an attack, what would you do? e5. E5, isn't it a pawn sacrifice? So take, then which pawn takes? Maybe this? G6. No, you cannot play G6. You have the H pawn pinned. Like that. Thanks, John. It's bishop e4. Right, it's bishop e4 trying to blockade. Well, castling was possible, but is so risky. At least you have to calculate this line. If you capture, it is a disaster. It's a quick checkmate. I'll show you. Like rook h8, king h8, queen h5. Queen h7 checkmate. So, but after g6, you may go there, and maybe it's not losing because your pieces are very close. Like you do this, and if this, you take with the queen, bringing the queen to the defense. If not the queen, then you would lose. Okay, fine. So bishop e4 is much, much better and much safer. You can exchange the bishops. You still control the e4 square. So queen g2, chasing it away. Queen goes to d5. They play g6, but they are now playing without this bishop. It cannot join the place of action and is unlikely to join the place of action in the future. F takes, and h6. Queen h1. So not sure what's the purpose of this move, but black can just successfully castle. And the white's position is so unpromising since then that they decided to sacrifice the rook. But let's discuss what they could do instead. So maybe they can move this rook. Let's say they play rook d1. Well, queen a2, queen e4. So it doesn't work. What do you think our plan here should be? Well, we can win this pawn, I agree, but maybe it's not so important because this pawn closes our king's position. C takes d4, I agree. If c takes d4, then you invade the enemy camp, you can capture a2, you can always capture on d2 at the very best moment. What else? If they capture with a different pawn, because typically they want to move to make the bishop more open, you can just exchange at again at the moment which you think is best, and then win the pawn on f4. Or you can continue with queen f5 and take later and take these two. Right. That's why they decided to get some promising chances with this sacrifice. But rook c7 and everything looks good. Castle queenside. Well, now rook h1 is coming. So what would you suggest here to defend the position? Queen e2 is a little risky, right? Because, well, you, of course, yeah, you stop rook h1, actually, because if rook h1, you have a checkmate here with knight c3, like that. Well, it's a bit risky because the queen moves away. So instead, knight f2, it stops this move and attacks the rook. If rook f1, it's queen g2. So that's why they played rook here. But rook g7 is enough. Bishop a1, check. Here you can successfully take, capture on a2, or just queen e4, threatening to take any of these pawns, or threatening to do this. Well, you have extra rook. Capturing the pawn on the edge of the board doesn't make much sense because you're already winning. Your task is to ruin the position, open the lines, and simplify. King f2, c takes d4, c takes d4, and this is where white resigned. Well, because black can just play rook c8 and invade the enemy territory. So this is how the game ended. But take a look at this position again and think about this move. The knight goes to stop f5. And it's fine to ruin the pawn structure in order to achieve it. And then the knight goes to d6 to stop e4 and f5 pawns. So it's a mechanical blockade. Think about this every time when your opponent has strong pawns, especially in the center. Let's continue with the next example. They also have pawns in the center, but what would you suggest for white to continue to not let black build a strong pawn center? Okay, f5, bishop d4 as suggestions. And g4. Yeah, c5, definitely c5, because if d6 or d5 is played, we would like to ruin these pawns. This to make more pawn islands to our opponent, because then it will be easier for us to stop these pawns. Well, the pawn is not hanging because of queen h5. So he reacted with d5 because he needs to develop this bishop. And passant, bishop d6. Now white succeeded with their main goal. So advancing the pawns like that in order to uh, divide enemy pawn structure into more pawn islands definitely is a good strategy. Rook hd1, putting pressure on d6. King e7, defending it. King g1, an artificial castling. Now they exchange the bishops through c5. The king moves away, and queen b4, attacking here. What would you suggest in this position? So b2 is currently hanging. Should we just play b3, or we can find a better move? Okay, rook ac1, and if rook ac1 they decide to take on b2, then what? Okay, so good question by Peter. In another session, I called a pawn like b2 a weak pawn. How is it weak? Or isn't... Well, it's not in this position. Here you can play b3 and it's not so weak. It can become the object of the attack once your opponent decides, for example, advance the pawn here and exchange on b3. Then the pawn on the b file will be a weakness, but not at the moment. Well, it can be a weakness if, for example, doing b3 leads to serious disadvantages, like the complex of dark squares becomes weak, and you, for example, cannot block any checks on c3 with a piece on c3 or something like that, and it's hard for you to defend. But this time, the pawn isn't actually hanging. For example, if you move the queen and they take, it's a trap. So here it's not. With queen e3, we also defend f4. Why not queen g4? Well, queen g4 makes sense. You're threatening with this move. Maybe king f7. And then you make the queen the object of the attack. There is also a pin. And rook g8 can be played with the templates at a certain point if they want to attack g2. So queen e3 is better for such purposes. It also puts pressure on a7. Queen a5. Now b3 was played. Bishop d7. Bishop c4 putting pressure on e6. And, well, this pawn cannot move. Rook b d8, rook e1. Well, the last attempt to save the pawn is to exchange the queens. But with such a king, of course, we shouldn't exchange the pawns. Or exchange the queens. If we do, then we have fewer threats only. Well, queen g3 this time, actually. Let's invade the enemy camp. But they have this. Queen h3, put pressure there. And this is where they resigned. Why did they resign? Because it's not possible to save the pawn. Okay, well, maybe you can help me here and tell me what white should do after this. Brian, do you mean h4 with the queen? Okay, so here many of you suggest f. Brian suggests a4. Well, I don't think it does make sense. It's a very slow move. f5. Many of you suggested f5 move. Yes, f5 actually works because the only way to save is this, but this means we can capture there, and this is a losing position. Yes, f5 works, but if the rook wasn't there, then bishop e6, pawn takes, and f5 in this position would work too. How would it work? Because now there is no possibility of pushing the pawn forward. It's not a pawn, it's a bishop. And rook e6 is coming, making the king an easy object of the attack. Why not e5 by black? Well, e5 by black, blunder is on g8. Why not e5 in this position by black? Okay. Queen h4. Now I'm threatening to take it with a rook, as well as with a pawn. F5 here doesn't make sense because there is not enough pressure on e5. You mean f5 by black makes sense? No, it doesn't. I think you can just capture it. So queen f2, let's say. Rook takes e6, bishop takes, queen takes, king d1. I think it's game over. Even if there is no checkmate, I can just bring the bishop, protect, and checkmate the king later. Okay, fine. So what I want you to remember is this maneuver, which forces our opponent to, once he does any pawn movements which are required in order to develop his pieces, this allows us to capture en passant and make more pawn islands and more targets for us to attack. And at the same time, we are weakening his pawn center. Let's continue with the next example. Oh, this is the position to analyze for white. It's taken from the game between Leonid Stein and Lubomir Kovalik. Well, what do you think black wants to do? It's white to move in this position, but what do you think black wants to initiate? What is their plan? Yeah, so d5. Break up with d5, exactly. So they should open the position like that because it opens their bishops. Both opens the d file. They need more space, exactly. White wants to attack on the king side. Well, yes, the white wants to attack on the king side. As well as to set the knight on d5, for example, to block the pawn on d6 forever. What do you think? It's actually white to move, so which move do they have to start with? Knight e3 is logical, but does knight e3 stop d5? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5 versus 1, 2, 3. So I think d5 works. Take, 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 rook takes. Rook takes, queen takes, and black is okay. So knight e3 fails. C4, yeah, C4 works, but let's play A5. Let's just chase. No, actually, C4 in this position doesn't work because of this move. And then they take with a knight. But A5 first. So let's chase the knight away. It goes back somewhere, doesn't matter where. And after that, you can play C4, and that stops D5. Why you can play C4? Because if they take, you have bishop B3 attacking the rook. So 97, 93, exactly like you suggested. So guys, you are on the right direction, but you still have to find accurate moves and not only think of what you can do, but how to stop your opponent from achieving what he wants. B takes c4, b takes c4, queen goes to c8. No, bishop d2, just a developing move. Well, probably we want to allocate this for the rook because d5 is not playable at all. We may focus on the queenside play. Knight g6, knight d5. So they decided to take with a knight. Maybe taking with the bishop was better. But taking with the bishop means a6 will be a weakness. Now the bishop is not hanging because the rook is under attack. So rook moves and queen moves to protect the bishop. Now, what do we see? We successfully created a pawn chain. We blocked on d5 and we obtained more space on the queen side. That's why we now move to the queen side plane. Yeah, so the b file, the c file looks good too. Knight f4, rook goes there, and just bishop d1. Well, black now tries to focus on the attack because they have material majority there. Bishop b4, I don't close the file. Maybe you want to play queen b6 first, or queen takes b7 just. With bishop b4, you attack the pawn, which is protected so many times. That's why I don't see the purpose of doing it. If you are talking about bishop g4, well, yes, it does work here, then queen e7. This is actually what was played on the very next move, so it's fine. Knight f5, queen g5. So what do you think? Can we take, or we have to defend our position on the king side first? Knight e2 is a threat, yes, because after bishop takes, it's queen g2 mate. But knight e2 means that, well, let's say we take there, then they play knight e2. We cannot take it. We have to move the king, so let's say f1. They cannot take the rook, so they have to take there. But I still think it's winning. Just bishop e2. Maybe in this position they'd better play h5. But you can just take, and if pawn takes, you play this move. If queen takes, then you play queen f7 move. So you cannot play bishop f3 because of queen f3, but you can play queen f7. And if king h7, just take on h5. g2 is not under attack. I mean, not enough times. So yeah, capturing on b7 works, but white decided to avoid complications and took on f4 first. And after that, took on b7, and this is how the game ended. For example, h5, this, bishop h5, it's completely fine. Okay, let's analyze the very beginning of the game and see what happened. So here, actually, there is no pawn chain. But if only black is able to play d6, he solves most of his issues and activates all of his pieces. That's why blockading this point does make a lot of sense. So doing this move, well, is a mistake because they can still play so. They can capture on c3 also. Doing c4 is not enough. It's a pawn blunder, and there is no compensation. That's why, because we're expecting this, we should make such moves which do not allow our opponent to play d5, and that allows our opponent only to do something else, something defensive. So we gain a temper and force one of the pieces away from the place of action, from the d5 square, one supporter less. After which we can continue with c4, bringing the second attacker. And these two pawns are enough to stop d5. And this is how we limit our opponent's counterplay, and we can do what we want on any side of the board. Here, after the transfer of the knight on d5, we definitely have more space there and the open files for us to attack. That's why we should focus on the attack there. Okay, fine. The last example for today, after which we will discuss the games between now in the World Rapid Championship. Here it was Svetozar Gligorich playing against Vasily Smyslov. Well, these pawns in the center are very strong. It's actually Grünfeld. And they played Queen f2, which is a mistake. Well, not a serious mistake, but definitely a slow move, which allows Black to consolidate his pieces and come up with a perfect plan of how to blockade the pawns in the center and get a clear plan of how to improve their position and play for a win. No, f4 is a blunder on e6, so you cannot play this move right away. Otherwise, I would agree with you. So yes, Shahrat, knight a5 first. You chase the bishop away. Well, where the bishop goes. If the bishop goes there, you can just win a pawn. So he has to go to d3 to protect it. And then f5 makes sense. Now the center is blocked. Well, if they play this move, it's great. But they push here to grab more space and to block our bishop. However, even this is fine. What would you continue in this position? Bishop f8. Okay, interesting. I don't think it's a mistake, bishop f8. But I prefer the move that was played in the game more. But yeah, bishop f8 is okay move. c4 was played, right? Why c4? To open the diagonal for the bishop. This is how you stabilize the center. So the bishop can go there once it is required there. But because white wants to attack on that side, it does make sense to bring the knight there first. And if, for example, if they take here, which pawn would you capture? So you think with the g pawn. I think that with the e pawn, generally speaking, it would make more sense if you expect your opponent to attack. But actually, this time you can attack instead. King h8, rook g8, and instead of white, you can attack by bringing the queen to c6 too. So that's why instead of capturing, they first prepare their position with king h2. Queen c6. Knight goes to g3 and b5. a4 to undermine a6. Rook b1. Well, we prepare our pieces. Bishop d2. And this is another critical moment. Why not knight d5? It is not required at the moment. What's the purpose of knight d5? You close the way for the queen, which means that this queen can move somewhere and not protect g2 anymore. So at the moment, I don't see the purpose of doing this move. Also, maybe they decide to sacrifice on f5. Even before, well, when? c4, this, king h2, knight d5. What's the purpose? So you have your knight on d5, but how do you take advantage of it? Well, maybe you try to do something like that. Well, yeah, it would be a possible plan. But while there is a rook on the c file and your queen, then opening the position doesn't make sense. You'd better first move the queen, but you need the queen on c6 to threaten some mating ideas. Okay, so how would you play in this position? King h8? Oh, king h8 is a prophylaxis. Well, it's a possible move if you don't know what to do. Bishop a8. What's the purpose of bishop a8? 8 bishop a 8? 8 bishop a 8. 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 8 bishop a Just to open the diagonal. Okay, pawn takes on a4. Actually, yes, pawn takes on a4. Why? Because it's either this pawn becomes a dangerous passed pawn or you open the line for your rook. Rook a1, bishop a8. Bishop a4, queen moves, but you can invade the enemy camp. And for if they, for example, do this, you can swap one rook pair and offer another trade. And then you invade with the queen. Here, or just keep it on b7. That's why rook a2, just to stop it. But rook b6. Now g takes f5 was played. So now the question for you, well, do we still take with the g pawn, or maybe with a knight or the e pawn? Okay, so Shahrat suggests knight f5. Can you please explain the purpose? Okay. Shahin also. Arush suggests the g. Okay. Remove the defender of the king. So this is the defender of the king, you mean? And for such purposes, we play with a knight. Well, what can I say? It is a defender. Well, we definitely shouldn't do this because it opens the G file. While we decided to focus on the queen side and do something like that, we shouldn't allow them any counterplay on that G file. That's why not this. Taking with the knight means that we can exchange. We first of all allow them to play this move, and then the knight goes to some unpleasant squares. Oh well, not at the moment, of course. It's under attack. But potentially we do allow them. But even if they just exchange, so which piece do we take with? With the E or with the G? Well, anyway, we exchange the knight, which doesn't participate in the game, so it's not a very active knight. And what does this knight defend? H1. Well, H1 only. And we don't have the queen on this diagonal at the moment. So it does make sense to capture with the E and instead use our knight on d5 and later transfer it somewhere else. We need this knight in order to blockade d5. Okay, so this, knight e2, a5. Bishop c2 was played. Well, I don't understand why it's marked with a brilliant move. It's just a possible move. Probably by mistake. What do you think black should continue with? Oh, well, if there is anything you want to say, you can unmute yourself and share the line, for example. So white is going to capture on a5. Well, I don't think so. Why? Well, it's too much to pay for such an attack, which is quite unpromising because these are the only pieces that can participate, but the bishop is already protected enough times. The rook can go to g6 to block all this stuff, and finally king h1, rook g8 can be played. Bishop h6, but they still have a lot of defenders. Okay, so we have the pawn there, which is under attack, actually. Yes, thanks, John. So knight before to sacrifice, it's quite an interesting idea because you get to pass pawns, and yes, they are dangerous. But are you sure that your opponent won't sacrifice a minor piece for them? Knight c3, well, no. Knight c3, definitely no. But rook b3 does make a lot of sense. Instead of sacrificing a piece here, in order to get two passed pawns, two connected passed pawns, you sacrifice exchange only. And with this position being closed enough, maybe the extra exchange doesn't matter so much because, for example, you have a very good bishop that cannot be parried, and probably this bishop costs more than a rook. That's why such a common trick with the idea to connect the pawns. And well, you also know that two pawns on the third rank are stronger than a rook, and also c3 becomes the object of the attack. Exactly. So they played rook a4 trying to blockade. Bishop f8, bishop b2. Well, why not to take? Knight takes c3, queen takes c3, bishop b2. And looks like they are able to hold the blockade of these pawns. The bishop on b2 and the rook on a4, pressuring a5. Okay, so bishop f8 first, bishop b2. Well, something like knight b6 should be played, but this time I think knight b6, yeah, it actually works. It works well. It's a double attack, and we win material. They have to sacrifice exchange at the very least, but at the same time, we have a passed pawn. So even after knight c1, it's a very good position. We are either able to invade the enemy camp, or bring the rook to a2, or just win this bishop. But Black decided to not play such a move because they considered this bishop to be too strong. Instead, they played a different move. What do you think? Which move I'm talking about? Well, bishop c6 looks good. Then the rook moves to a1, of course. But no, it wasn't bishop c6. Queen c6? No, it wasn't queen c6. But queen c6 was a part of the combination that Black had in mind once he made the move that he made on the board. Yeah, queen c6 was attacking the rook with some threats, but queen c6, which exact threats you create? Can he just take on a5? Yes, thanks, Bartholomew. It's 93, and John also. It's 93. How does it work? If queen e3, this is a double attack. And you still keep your two pawns on the flank. Rook f a1 was played instead, and the knight goes to c4, attacking on b2. So knight g3, protecting on b2. Bishop e7 to pin. Knight goes to f1. Queen c6, attacking h1. Well, well, could they play maybe this move again? No, it's still this problem. After which this queen invades the enemy territory. How? Well, probably with these moves. Then queen f3, queen takes f4. Or maybe let's
You could
just take
do
there.
you could do bishop x. You,
So you do bishop takes knight, then
when the queen takes, you capture the bishop.
yeah, if the queen you capture the bishop, but if the king captures on g3. Then you still have to capture there. Okay, let me show you. So, well, let's play a waiting move for them. Actually, it's a kind of a Zugzwang. Let's say queen e2. So you can take, they take, you take, they take, you do this. And after this move, well, queen h4 is a disaster. You take there. The king moves to g1. Let's take something else. And in this position, well, I still can take. Yeah, I still can take, because if the king goes to the second rank, it's game over. If he goes to the first rank, then I force him to go to the second rank. And it's a checkmate. Otherwise, he loses the queen. Yeah, something like that. Oops. That's why he decided to sacrifice exchange back after queen c6. Queen h1 check, so not taking there, but queen h1, and after king g3, it's h5, and checkmate is unavoidable. It's h4. Was there anything to stop? Well, only queen sacrifice. And even a queen sacrifice would be just a temporary defense. For example, queen e3, queen g2, queen d2, let's say, queen g1, oops, g1, and after, well, yes, it's game over. And if they play h4 in this position, bishop h4 works. So nothing could help. This is how the game ended. So what I want you to remember, blockade the enemy pawns with your minor pieces and pawns. If we're talking about minor pieces, first of all, it should be the knights. When your opponent has pawns in the center, you are likely to create pass pawns on the flank. So try to blockade the enemy center, prevent his pieces activity, and at the same time create a counterplay on the side. For example, like Black did here by playing rook b3 and by connecting the pawns. But even if even if White didn't capture on b3, through the b file and because of attacking the base, the pawn on c3, White would experience serious issues. So that was the most critical moment. So the pawn is hanging, and I can hardly suggest a good move. For example, this, we can just double and play this at the very next step and threaten to take on c2 after the exchange of the rooks. Fine, so we are done with the main part of the webinar, and now we continue. We will continue with the games of the Rapid World Championship. However, before we continue with these games, I would like to remind you that if you like the webinars, if you want to support my work as well as the work of my team, so there are two people. One of them is a FIDE master, the other one is just a administrator. So they are working with me, they are helping me to create this content, they are preparing the games, then I choose and comment them and present them on the webinars. So if you want to support us, this is the link that allows you to do it. It works easily. You just go through it, click PayPal, click donate button, it redirects you to PayPal. You enter the amount you want to donate, click this button, and then you enter your PayPal account and money are automatically delivered to my PayPal account. Okay, I can type the link in the chat. By the way, I think that starting from the next year, I'm going to continue with doing streams devoting to puzzles, but not in Zoom, but on Twitch. I will explain the way that I think when I'm solving puzzles, because solving puzzles is a part and parcel of a successful training plan for any chess player, even if you are a top grandmaster. Okay, let's continue. So let's continue. And for today, there are three. I chose three games, all three played by Volodar Murzin. Oh, yes. Thanks, Peter. Yeah. So, guys, I completely forgot to uh, to announce it. Yeah, we have a course. We have group lessons. We studied and already conducted 6 classes. There will be the 7th one. The seventh one will be on Monday, tomorrow. So these are group lessons for players from 12 to 1500. However, if you are slightly below or slightly above, it still works. So at these group classes, uh, we have a special training plan. This is what we are covering. For example, week. So the lesson number 7 is week 4. So we are going to talk about calculation. We did talk about how to evaluate the position. Okay, and it's not too late to join. Well, you just will receive the recordings of the previous lessons, which you can watch when you have time. Um, well, yes, it's very reasonable price. So it's $79 per month, or if you pay everything immediately, it's 220, which means that you pay around $6 per hour. It's a very cheap. I don't know anybody who offers trainings at such a cheap level. Everyone title player who offers such cheap trainings. So also the link is here. If you have any questions regarding this, you can always message me. At my email, tricksofchess@gmail.com. Anyway, let's continue with Murzin's games. So, first of all, the game of the first day when he defeated Pragna with black pieces. Can you please? Okay, thank you. It was Italian game, and Murzin was playing with black pieces. C3. Okay, so D4. Well, in this position, I with white played D3, but there were such days when I played D4. D4, this, and E5. Here, D5 is a must, everything else loses. D5, bishop B5, knight goes to E4, c takes d4, and bishop b6. So this is the most common position. It's a kind of a pawn chain, and later in the game, black should undermine it with f6. Knight c3. Castle, bishop e3, bishop f5. So these moves are very common. However, usually f5 is common here, f5 or f6. And if so, because there is a lot of potential for this pawn, it can go further, it can support the attack, white should capture it. And these positions are considered approximately equal. So bishop c6, b takes c6, knight a5, queen goes there to defend, castle, but bishop a6, they have a bishop pair, but the bishop on b6 isn't good. But they are going to improve it with this move. So, well, this is what I would prefer playing for black pieces rather than for white, because of two pawns that cannot be blocked and because of the bishop activity too. Okay, so this is the main line, and probably Prague was ready for that, but bishop f5 was played, a different move. Not a strong move, actually, but definitely a playable continuation. Knight takes e3, b takes e3, and f6. You see? So still the same plan. Usually people here take and queen takes. Yeah, so by doing d3, it's a slow Italian. Like, yes. But, well, maybe this line is good for rapid. However, I would prefer playing d3 in both cases. At least I understand something there. Here, it's so unpredictable. So typically people play like that, bishop e2, h6. But in that game, it was queen d2, a novelty. Bishop e4 creates serious problems with the pawn on e5. But bishop takes c6 to liquidate the knight, which was attacking there. So actually, the light squared bishop seems to be not so important in this position comparing to that knight on c6. This move also doubles the pawns, which makes the bishop out of the place of action, and the only way to activate it is to play c5. So take, bishop f3, and this is where white plays f takes g7, intermediate move. So king takes g7 actually is a blunder. King h8, g takes f3, and then this and the strong attack there, while this bishop is out of the place of action. That's why it wasn't played. Instead, rook f7. So if he wants to take it, he'll take it later and maybe not with the king. G takes f3, and he plays queen f6, trying to capture it with this. f4, logical, right? You will save the pawn. But the light squares are weakened, and also this bishop becomes bad too. So they both are bad, actually. Queen f5, occupying light squares. King h1, rook g7. Well, maybe doing something like that would be better. Just a preparation. And then bishop a5, trying to force the queen to stay closer. But it was rook g7. Queen e2. Yeah, bishop a5 would tie the queen to the pawn on ce3. Why not queen h3? So what's the purpose of queen h3? Queen f3. I think they would continue with queen e2. And if you take there, it's rook here. That's why bishop a5 would be a good move. I agree. Now, okay. So queen f5, king h1, rook takes g7, queen e2, king f7. So not even to h8, but to f7. Well, it's actually safe. There is no chance to invade, I think. And the rook goes to g8. So queen f3, the rook goes to g8. Rook a1. And the key moment, what would you play? Maybe it's not the key moment, but one of the key moments. Maybe h5. Well, h5 is risky. Well, I don't think that black here succeeds with the attack. If I were black, I would probably continue with bishop a5 here. Bishop d2. Because if this move, it's rook e5. I don't think it's promising. That's why he plays queen g4. He realizes that there is no possible way to succeed with the attack, and that's why he starts playing positionally. Well, queen d3, queen d3, queen h5 maybe. Also f5 looks dangerous. Okay, so queen g4. He exchanges the queens, thinking that this endgame is more favorable for black. Well, actually, it's equal. King f6. Maybe here would be better, because if c4, it does make sense to bring the king to d7. Or even to d5, right? c4, take, king d5. It will be easier than to play c5 here. And the king cannot be attacked. But king f6, c4, king f5, c5, the bishop becomes bad. Well, it seems now white is better, because they have some activity here. Rook g2 was played. What's the purpose of rook g2? Well, it does stop f3. But well, maybe that would be a good idea. But the problem is that when the king captures, it's when the king goes there, it's king g2 simply. Yeah, it does stop f3. I wonder if we can checkmate somehow, but doesn't look so. King f4, king f3, yes, but what then? Rook g4, rook h4, and rook h2, maybe. But let's say this, king f4, rook a7, king f3. And here I only see a perpetual. For example, this, and now a rook h2 leads to a perpetual check. Well, if, for example, you play this, then this is a checkmate. That's right. But if, let's say, they play rook a3, threatening to chase your king away, rook h4 no longer works, just bishop c1. That's why after this move, you have to deliver a perpetual check. That would be a draw. But in the game, it was rook b3 played, which is a good move. King e4, rook goes there, king f3. Well, moving the bishop to d2 doesn't make sense, right? Because this is a checkmate. So there is no time to capture this bishop. That's why king e3, he tries to distract the black pieces with f5. King goes to e2, f6. Rook goes there to stop it.
A few moves ago, why not rook to g4? Rook on. Both Brian and I were saying.
So are you threatening with, well, let's say f6 and then what? Perpetual check, but this time is it a perpetual check actually? If you do so,
No,
I can.
if you the rook here to h4, and now you're threatening checkmate.
No, you lose everything. So this time it doesn't work because the king escapes. There is no rook on f1, and that's the reason why rook h. Well, that's the reason why there is no perpetual check, and the checkmate doesn't work. Checkmating idea here fails. Just he moves the bishop, and even if the bishop moves somewhere else, it's still there still would be a possibility to save. Let's say this. Well, let's say it's not hanging. h3.
Why? Sorry, why can't you play rook takes h2? A move
It's a
ago.
check.
Oh.
So it's a check on the third rank. And well, again, this as a perpetual check do not work because the king escapes to f1. And this doesn't lead to a checkmate because we can move the bishop and chase the king from the third rank, which means that this king gets these two squares. Also bishop g5 even. So that's why king e2, f6, rook goes there, check, king f3. And this is where White made a significant mistake. He was actually winning. And if only he won, Murzin probably wouldn't become a world champion. What do you think? Bishop f1, or what do you mean? So f7 should be played. Rook f8. Well, okay. So let's talk about bishop. What? Yeah, no, it's white to move. f7. White should play f7. Ah, you mean black should play this move. Okay. Well, oh, with the idea of doing checkmate. But then they can play h4, so they can escape from the checkmate, from this mating threat. So f7 instead would work. How? Rook f8, check, king goes there, and now just move the pawn, because after this, it's enough to play rook c2. Well, let's play rook f2, and then go there to deliver a ladder mate. Like that. Well, he missed it. Instead, he played this move, and that was a terrible mistake, because now bishop e1 works. So he is forced to play this move. If he does h4 this time, it fails. So rook e1, king e1, and now white is down exchange. And this is how he lost the game. Now, well, this is technically losing position. He cannot save this pawn, and it's easy to realize exchange. Also, rook g1 is a threat. That's why check, king a2, bishop goes there. Bishop g3, of course, to defend. Just, well, just h5 would be good. But king d3 is okay too. It's just pure technique. Now h5 works well. Yeah, this is what he plays. King g2 and h4. So he wins material. King f3 or king h3 doesn't matter. But h takes g3 is enough. And after this move, what do you think? How do we play? I think there are two ways. Yeah, g2. Or you can start with rook g7. But g2, why? Because once this rook retreats, you can play g1 and then win a rook. So h4, king goes there, and now the king comes closer. So h5. For example, you can play this move, king g6. King goes there, f5. And at the very least, you can bring your king. And, well, here, sacrifice, take there, promote the d, up to you. Yes, sacrificing the rook is enough. If f6, then still sacrificing the rook should be enough. King takes, it's a winning position. Fine, so that's why after g2 the game was over. Very good game. Well, they didn't play perfectly well, but we understand it was rapid. They were in a time pressure, but the game was really nice. And the game that he won against Caruana with white pieces. e5, knight b5, d6. So bishop g5, it's Chelyabinsk variation. This is the line I play. Bishop takes and c4. b4, knight moves, a5. Bishop e2 just. Well, this is not what I play. Here, if I'm not mistaken, I play h4 or g3 first. Okay, bishop e2. Now let me see if the bishop e2 is the main move here. No, g3 is the main move, actually. Bishop e2 is only the third move. The third popular move. Castle, g6. Why not knight takes f6? What's the purpose of taking this bad bishop? So it's totally blocked. But this knight in the center is super good. That's why this bishop doesn't cost it. Queen d3, bishop g7, rook a d1, bishop e6. But the position is equal. Knight e3 at some point to replace the knight is a very good idea. I absolutely agree. But he chooses a different strategy, bishop f3, to support d5 and to prepare for this move. Well, a3 opening the position there. Yes, it can be a part of the plan, but first we should prepare our pieces. Queen b8. Maybe to defend the b file and to bring the rook to the game. b3. Now if a3, it's probably this, but I don't think b3 is a good move by black. So white plays b3. This is fine. Queen h7. That's the reason of moving the queen. The queen goes to this diagonal. It allows to settle the knight on d4. So if you play knight e3, for example, they can do this move. And then you have to think of how to chase this knight away from d4. That's why white prefers to keep the knight on c2. King h1, kind of a prophylaxis. g3, bishop moves, and the f pawn will move further. But you should be very accurate with such a move because it activates the enemy bishop. If this bishop is attacking nothing, it's possible. But if you think that the bishop activity becomes more decisive, you shouldn't do that. Instead, maybe you should focus on something like this. But here Murzin plays f4. Knight d4. Here he could take, for example, but if he takes, then queen takes. Oh, the queen takes, we can move the queen away. So the bishop takes. This pawn, by the first glance, is a weakness, but how can you attack it? So he decided to not exchange. He played with the knight there to keep the knight on d5. a4, f5. Yeah, f5 is logical because he still doesn't allow the e pawn to move, and he thinks of a kingside attack. Knight e7. Well, knight e7 cannot be played. Bishop takes, knight takes. 8 takes b3, 8 takes b3, rook a7. So black tries to attack through the a file. But queen e3. And this move already contains a threat. If, for example, here you decide to play rook a2, you can get in trouble. Which trouble I'm talking about? Who can tell me? Yes, it's f6, bishop h6, and knight e7. Or they just lose the bishop. That's why f6. But f6 makes this bishop even worse. Well, I cannot say this bishop is super good. h4. Rook a2, g4, and knight e2. So what's the purpose of knight e2? To exchange the queens, to try to occupy f4 if possible. But if white wants to succeed with the attack, he should keep the queens on the board. Well, what I think Murzin is doing, so he is probably stronger than Caruana in the positions where fast play is required. So when taking quick decisions is required. That's why he wants to keep more pieces on the board to once the game comes to the time trouble, they both would be able to create threats, and because of his ability to, because of Murzin's ability to play faster in such play faster and find faster decisions, he thought that he could play for a win. Taking queens, so take, well, it improves the enemy pawn structure because d6 was a backward pawn and the object of the attack. I think it's actually equal position. Queen h3. So it's better to keep the queens on the board. Well, knight e7 there, I don't see the point. Okay, so this, then what? Take on g6, and pawn takes g6. Does g5? Well, right now the knight is hanging. Well, no, I don't think you can do it. If you do g5 here, well, just take there. I mean, fork and take on f1. Queen h3 is a good move. Ah, so rook f7 and g5 in this position. Yes, it is a good move. Queen c8, queen goes back to d3. I mean, rook goes back to d3 to cover g3 square. Because white is assuming this, and then he doesn't want to blunder this move. Well, actually, he wants the rook to stay on d3, but the bishop to take. But this rook will be defending g3. F takes g5, h takes g5, and well, they better play this or that move, but they decided to take on f5, and that was a mistake. Why? Because it allows the bishop to go to the place of action. In order to stop it, Caruana played e4 to activate his bishop. But this is a blunder, I think. Just bishop takes e4 with f6. So bishop f4, I don't understand what he had in mind. Maybe knight c3, but for knight c3, we can just take once and then play f6. It's a losing position. The pawn is lost. So rook a3 was played. I don't know what for. It's a mistake. Maybe again, they were low on time. Bishop a5. Bishop takes e4, rook goes there, and queen g4. So to bring the rook there. But that was a wrong plan, actually. It seems logical, but it was wrong. If so, in this position, this is the move that was played. In this position, it's possible to play rook a1 and get a counterplay. Okay, thanks, Brian. Instead of that, just bishop g2, preventing the rook activity. And continue attacking with knight f6, queen h5, I think. Okay, so rook h3, rook a1, knight e7. King f8, knight takes queen, rook takes f1, king g2. I think you can play something like, oh, I can just bring this move, and then how the king saves. Yes, you can speak.
Hi, sorry. I want to know when in the position where Murzin goes h3 and Caruana brings the rook to a1, can't we just like go knight, get e7 check?
Knight e7. Yes, but he can sacrifice it. King f8, and if white takes, white loses a rook, and then white cannot withstand such a strong attack. At least it's a perpetual check. Or after bishop d3, we can still capture the queen. And if you calculate material, it is equal. So yeah, rook g1, I think.
Oh, okay.
So, but he should play so. But instead, he played this move. Maybe actually because he saw this knight e7 fork and didn't calculate it to the very end. So g6, adding pressure. Rook a1, take, but the king escapes. Well, it can be another check, but if so, just king f3 and checks are over. That's why rook a7, and he does rook h7. Maybe not the best way, but it's definitely a possible move. Well, if this move, it's f6, which is a check. There is also checkmate on g7. After king h7, rook h7 sacrifice? No, of course not. So g6, rook a1, this, rook a7, and now rook h7 sacrifice was played. Well, it's not a sacrifice, it's exchange. So the knight takes, queen takes, and if king h7, he didn't want f6. Queen e8. Here, just queen g4 would work, but he played queen c2, trying to defend his position. Maybe he wasn't sure that he can win. Or maybe he was low on time. King h7, king f3, queen a1, knight goes there. And white is a pawn up, so that's why he simply exchanges. If queen d1, knight takes d1, it's absolutely lost. How is it lost? Well, it's just possible to bring the knight and attack the pawns. Like bring the knight there, then bishop c3, bring the king there, they take here, you take on d6 and promote the c pawn. That's it. Queen c3 was played, king f4. And f6 here would be a winning move. If bishop takes, it's queen d6 with a strong attack. But instead, Murzin plays a very defensive move. Because he offers a trade. It's logical. King d5, queen a1, c5. Well, c5 does make sense. D takes c5 and king a6. So he is creating a mating net for the enemy king, which does make sense if your opponent is low on time. Queen d4, and now it is the queens are exchanged. So queen d4 was a mistake, actually. This endgame is completely lost. Instead, in this position, he'd better just play something like that, trying to bring his queen back and take advantage of the enemy king's weakness too, because well, queen d8 is not possible because of this move. Queen d7 isn't possible because of queen e5 checkmate. Here, for example, king d7 should be played, but this move already allows you just to move the bishop back at the very least. Maybe you can deliver this check. Maybe you can exchange this time. Maybe this time it's better. But he played queen d4 right away, and this was actually losing. Knight goes there. These are these are hanging. Bishop g3, knight takes there, and it's an easy win. Just two pawns, which he cannot stop. So now f6. Just game over. Well, it was an easy end game. When the queens are off, white was completely winning. Okay, and the last game that I would like to explore today, it's the game against Nakamura. So people are leaving our webinar because it takes longer today. E4, E5, it was Italian game, this time with H6. Okay, interesting. And knight C3, H6. Okay, knight D5, D6. Oh, I'm not familiar with this line, but I think that this is theory and they understand what they are doing. So here the position was equal. They are trying to maneuver. Let's go to the critical moment. So queen b5, adding pressure here and potentially taking d3. And Caruana plays, Nakamura plays queen c2. Just this move would be fine because it's protected, but he just moved the knight to b3, so he didn't want to retreat back. That's why he plays this. And this move blunders knight e4. He either blundered it or just underestimate. Oh, knight g5 looks very good here. I would play so. f4, take. Well, just go back. But the pawn structure is so good for black, and they are definitely playing for a win. For example, f5, knight h4. One knight goes there, or maybe they both go that way. Because if king g3, then g5. So it is possible to save that knight on h4, and it's so close to the enemy king. Knight f6, knight e5. Knight takes e5, rook takes e5. So in order to save the pawn, it's b6. So it looks like he just sacrificed the pawn back. If he did so, he would end with extra pawn. So knight f6 was a mistake. But at least he improved his pawn structure. However, the position is equal. Let's see, 7. Taking with the pawn covers the d4 square. Okay, a few exchanges, the position becomes simple. Maybe white is even better because of their pawn structure, but just a little. However, somehow he managed to lose it. And I think that the game was decided when both players were low on time. So let's analyze this most critical moment of the game, where knight c5 was played, and instead of taking there, then for example c3, knight e5 check, king moves rook b6. So c2 doesn't work because the concept of c2 is to deliver a check there, but now such a check is not playable. The check on d3 is stopped with this knight. But Nakamura played this move, and that was his first mistake. Knight d3. He cannot take because of a fork. He goes back, but king d6. So because of the position of the king, the black's position here is better. And his main mistake. So he should bring the knight to the center. Instead, he played this defensive move, leaving the king with fewer squares only. A knight f2, king moves, and c3 would work. How would it work? Well, the knight moves, let's say here to the safe place, maybe somewhere else, and then check this and this. And this is a winning position. So he goes there and we promote. Even if here, let's say this, c3, he goes to c4, it's still losing. Because knight d3 becomes a threat, and the knight is hanging. So it's not possible to stop knight d3. Maybe knight d3. Now, if this c2 cannot be played, but rook d2 can be played. Or maybe he goes that way. Okay, if he goes that way, probably we just take instead. Yeah, like that. And then chase away, play this, and play that. Looks winning. Okay, fine. But he doesn't use this chance. He plays king c6, and white continues with rook b8, another mistake. Instead, it could make sense to deliver a check, and after that, play knight b1 to stop c3 move. Because if, let's say, king d4, well, rook f6, and now c3, there is a check. And if the king goes there, there is another check to win. So probably king e3 or king e4, and again there is another check, and there will be repetition. Otherwise, the pawn on c3 is just lost for free. So rook b8, another mistake, king c7, and this is where Nakamura resigns because he cannot stop the pawn. So rook b6, for example, c3. Looks like very simple mistakes, which was possible to avoid. Well, how does it work? Knight moves, c2 and c1. So there was nothing that he could do. He just completely missed that this pawn can go with tempi. Well, I don't know what he was thinking. Probably they had seconds on their clock. Okay, so this is how he became world champion. Of course, he could lose some of these games, but he was lucky and he was playing quite strong. That's why he is a new world rapid champion. Let's see how he performs in Blitz. Unfortunately, there will be no Magnus Carlsen. Anyway, guys, so thank you for attending. Again, if you want to support, you can use this PayPal button. The link was already shared. There will be a webinar next Sunday. We are going to continue talking about World Rapid and Blitz Championships. Well, these two tournaments, as well as I will announce a topic later. Okay, yes, Shan, you can say what you want. Yeah, but your
Hello.
microphone. Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, I'm just asking, like, please suggest any drills for improving my gameplay in time pressure. Like, I lost my most of winning games in time pressure in tournaments.
I do so too.
So any drill? Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, so what you should
yeah.
work on is you should learn how to play under time pressure. This is what I'm doing myself. So I'm playing Blitz regularly. I am trying to not, even in the Blitz game, I'm trying to not get in the time pressure. But once I get it, I try to choose more simple and solid moves.
Yeah, like when I get to like in time pressure 3 second, 4 second on clock, I stuck at a position. I didn't find even a single move. Like I stuck at
Uh-huh.
position. I didn't find any move. Yes.
Yeah, you
And I'm
start.
in rapid. I'm 2200, 2232, and in blitz I'm 1800.
I see. So you're starting panicking once you are low on time. Well, don't leave yourself with seconds on your clock. Try
Okay.
to keep at least 30 seconds. Well, 6 seconds is almost lost. With 6 seconds, you can win only a technically winning position when you know what you're doing. For example, if you have a queen or you have a rook, extra rook, and you just capture the pawns and promote your pawns. So this is what you can win. But complicated positions, you either both should be in a time trouble. So you both should have 6 seconds on your clock, or you'd better leave more time on your clock and not allow such situations to happen in future. So I absolutely understand it's hard to play when you are with 6 seconds or below. So try to avoid it and try to keep more time or play faster to force your opponent to get in the time trouble before you get in the time trouble. Okay, fine. So thank you for attending and see you next Sunday. So happy New Year to everyone. Bye-bye.